TNA claimed to stand for total non-stop action, but a lot of the time it may as well have stood for really crappy wrestling. I realise that doesn't use the TNA initials, but that company never made much sense anyway, so why the hell should I? TNA did offer some excellent matches every now and again, but they were equally guilty of presenting bouts, often on pay-per-view, that were amateurish, ill-conceived, or turned into full-on train wrecks for one reason or another. I'm Adam Pacitti from Cultaholic Wrestling, and these are the 10 worst TNA matches. Join us! Number 10, Raven vs. Larry Zbyszko at Victory Road 2006. A match between Raven and Larry Zbyszko could have been passable, if not entertaining, had it taken place in WCW in 1998. When the two legends met at TNA Victory Road in 2006, they were both long past their best, and even the hair versus hair stipulation couldn't raise the interest levels above meh. Larry was 54 at this point, while the rapidly aging Raven may have only been 42, but looked and moved like he was far older. Watching the two of them gingerly roll around on the mat was just sad. They barely did anything out there, and what they did do looked very poor indeed. Despite being a 4-minute match, it also featured a dodgy ref bump that came from a toe hold of all things before an inexplicably gassed Raven scored the win with a DDT. The post-match scene with Zbyszko trying to run away and then being brought back for the head shaving lasted about as long as the match itself. As an aside, TNA only booked this boring nonsense because Larry was scheduled for hair restoration surgery and needed to shave his head anyway. Number 9, AJ Styles vs. Frank Trigg at No Surrender 2008. Bet you didn't think you'd see an AJ Styles match on it, did you? The phenomenal one was TNA's MVP for years and years, putting on some of the company's best matches in the X Division, tag, and world title scenes. But who the frig was Frank Trigg? Frank Trigg was a pretty decent MMA fighter who had fought in promotions like UFC and Pride, who was brought into TNA in 2008 and aligned himself with Kurt Angle, who used his passing resemblance to Trigg for storyline purposes. Trigg's bout with Styles was contested under MMA rules, which meant there would be 3 5-minute rounds and the only way to win would be via submission. After several minutes of badly worked MMA with tentative punches and kicks galore and a slap on the arse for some reason, the fans in Orlando turned on the match, loudly chanting, "We want wrestling, this is BS, and fire Russo!" The match finally came to a finish when AJ accidentally kneed his opponent in the groin, resulting in a no contest. Now, you might be incredulous at that, since Trigg had stated that the match could only end via submission, but let's just be glad it ended when it did, yeah? Number 8, Team 3D vs. LAX at Lockdown 2007. Of course, Styles vs. Trigg was not the first time TNA fans had requested that Vinnie Rue receive his standing orders. The 6,000 who rocked up to the Family Arena in Missouri for Lockdown 2007 were far from happy with the writer, who got blamed for everything dodgy by default. The All Cage Spectacular was a show that had a few good matches on it that were unfortunately offset by a bunch of nonsense. And it doesn't get much more nonsensical than the electrified cage tag team title match between LAX and Team 3D. Well, it does actually get more nonsensical, but we'll get there later. Under normal circumstances, a match between these two teams would have likely been pretty damn good, but they were completely hamstrung by not just the stipulation, but by the presentation of the stipulation they had been handed. It was just so unbelievably hokey, with wrestlers wearing rubber boots and gloves to avoid getting shocked by a cage that was clearly not electrified. Rather than have some pyro or sound effects to make it appear like it was, TNA opted to play with the arena light switch instead. It finally ended after a badly botched 3D on Homicide, but fans were past the point of caring, and I reckon Brother Ray and Devon were secretly longing for the concrete crypt when it was over. Number 7, Hermie Sadler vs. K-Krush at NWA TNA's weekly pay-per-view number 4. The very early days of TNA were very dark ones indeed. You had abhorrence and rampant homophobia, little people whacking off in bins, and Cheeks. Let us never forget about Cheeks. You also had TNA doing whatever they could to expand their predominantly southern fan base, which is why Jeff Jarrett brought in celebrity pals like country music star Toby Keith and NASCAR driver Hermie Sadler. And by all means, bring him in, Double J, but don't let them actually wrestle. On TNA's 4th weekly pay-per-view, Sadler squared off with K-Krush, who is better known as Ron Killings or R-Truth. Obviously, you tend to grade celebrity matches on a sliding scale, but even for a non-wrestler, Hermie just looks so weak out there, and it's ridiculous that he had anything resembling a competitive match with a future NWA World Heavyweight Champion. Krush got the pin, resorting to putting his feet on the ropes to do so, but the referee reversed the decision after the fact, giving the win to the unathletic, speedy race car man. Thurman Sparky Plug didn't die for this. Number 6, Rebel vs Shelly Martinez at One Night Only Knockouts Knockdown 2016. Some nights a wrestler will just have an off night. Some nights both wrestlers in a match will have off nights. Some nights both wrestlers in a match will have a night so off it makes you wonder whether, legally speaking, they should be allowed to wrestle again. Rebel and Shelly Martinez had a night like that at TNA's 2016 One Night Only Knockouts Knockdown show. Everything that could go wrong seemed to, and they looked incapable of executing the most rudimentary moves and sequences. I mean, seriously, even an eye poke looked like something that somebody on their first day of wrestling training would do. They also made a right hash of what I think was supposed to be an abdominal stretch and a flying head scissors. Oh, and did I mention Martinez selling by shouting, "My vag! My vag! I said my vag hurts!" I probably should. And then there was the finish. My goodness, the finish. It saw Shelly, who it should be noted had dedicated this match to her late grandmother in a pre-match promo, whiff on an attempted dive that left her hung up in the ropes upside down like a piñata and then get pinned with one of the worst covers of all time. This one's for you, Grandma. Number 5, Hermie versus Big Fat Oily Guy at Against All Odds 2007. Alright, how about a little bit of levity then? And what could provide that better than a storyline centered around horrific misogyny that led to a woman wrestling a man called Big Fat Oily Guy? Essentially, Hermie had been standing up for women's rights, something that naturally made her the heel as Kip James called her every sexist name under the sun. Authority figure Jim Cornette gave Christy an opportunity to defend the honor of the fairest sex in a tuxedo match at Against All Odds. Her opponent was a big fat oily guy played by former TNA timekeeper Tiny, which was really just a rather pitiful attempt to parody WWE's Big Dick Johnson. The match, and again I use that term loosely, consisted of horrendous looking punches, clothes ripping, and Oily Guy countering a sunset flip by sitting on Hermie's face. As Don West pointed out, this was like watching bad adult videos. Oh, and then Christy ripped Oily Guy's pants off, leaving him in just his little red thong. Really bad adult videos. Anyway, Hermie was the winner, though we were all losers, with TNA adding the chauvinistic post-match punchline of Kip James running in to yank Christy's top off for good measure. Total Neanderthal attitude. Number 4, Monty Brown vs Trytan at Destination X 2005. Once in a great while, we are privileged to experience a television event so extraordinary it becomes part of our shared heritage. 1969, Man Walks on the Moon. 1971, Man Walks on the Moon again. Then, for a long time, nothing happened. Until TNA Destination X 2005. Because that night was the scene of the debut of Trytan. What, you don't know who Trytan is? Well, good for you is all I can say. Trytan was the new gimmick for Ryan Wilson, who had previously been a member of the Red Shirt security team. I think he was meant to be a Terminator-esque cyborg or something, but I'm not 100% sure, and I 100% don't care. Anyway, after weeks of hype videos, we got Trytan's debut against the ultra-charismatic Monty Brown. It was, to put it mildly, a total and utter failure, filled with botches and mistimed moves that killed the Trytan character stone dead right out of the gate. Not that it had much of a chance anyway. For the finish, TNA had the lights go out as the alpha male pounced a random bloke in a black mask, played by Dennis Midian Knight, who Brown pinned for the win. Just fantastic. Number 3, Chris Harris vs James Storm at Lockdown 2007. For years, the America's Most Wanted tag team of Wildcat Chris Harris and Cowboy James Storm were the standard bearers for TNA's doubles division. When they broke up in 2007 and embarked upon a bitter blood feud, fans who had seen them light up the tag scene as teammates expected them to produce the same magic as opponents. After Storm blinded Harris in one eye, TNA did the logical thing and booked the two men to have their first outing under Blindfold match rules. Sorry, did I just say logical? I meant stupid. Oh, and did I mention this Blindfold match took place inside a steel cage? I mean, just book him in a cage match, you knob ends. That's a pretty damn good gimmick match for a heated blood feud, is it not? Anyway, what transpired was every blindfold match you've ever seen in your life, and if you've ever seen one, that's too many. Though somehow, this one was even duller as Storm and Harris did everything but make contact with one another during this pitiful pantomime. The TNA faithful made their feelings clear with cries of boring, we want wrestling, and fire Russo, while the match completely fell apart as the hoods fell off of Harris and Storm's heads. Number 2, Sting vs Jeff Hardy at Victory Road 2011. It has been examined to death and really isn't much of a match anyway, but no look at the very worst TNA outings would be complete without discussing the fiasco that was Sting vs Jeff Hardy at Victory Road 2011. Sting was set to defend his TNA World title against Hardy in a no disqualification match, but the charismatic Enigma had gone AWOL earlier in the day and only showed up right before he was set to make his entrance. Jeff had clearly been doing something he shouldn't have been doing during his time away and was clearly in no state to perform. Seeing the condition the challenger was in and with nobody in a position of authority around, Eric Bischoff called an audible and had Sting nail a single Scorpion death drop and forcefully pin Hardy to end the match in around 90 seconds. Fans who were at the show, not to mention those who had paid for the pay-per-view, were upset. Sting, meanwhile, had his disappointment written all over his face. Jeff was sent home after the show and went to rehab, but his behavior on the night of Victory Road 2011 has haunted him and been used as a stick to beat TNA with ever since. Number 1, Sharmell vs Jenna Morasca at Victory Road 2009. Now, you probably know Sharmell as Queen Sharmell, wife of Booker T and WWE Hall of Famer in her own right. She was a very, very good manager. She was not a good wrestler. Now, you probably remember Jenna Morasca from... scratch that, you probably have no clue who Jenna Morasca is, I certainly didn't. Apparently, she achieved some degree of fame after getting her kit off on reality show Survivor and then did Playboy. Now, I cannot speak for her spicy pics because I am not, contrary to what the internet might say, a pervert, but what I can tell you is that her match with Sharmell at Victory Road 2009 was one of, if not the worst in wrestling history. An insult to everyone who ordered the show, hell, an insult to everybody who pirated the show illegally. Jenna vs Sharmell defined negative chemistry and ably demonstrated just what can happen when you put two non-wrestlers in the ring. I realised Morasca had never been in a ring before this, but after watching this disaster, I'm convinced she had never seen a wrestling match or even knew what wrestling was. Because whatever it is, it certainly ain't this. Thanks for watching!